October 1962, music gives us a new folk singer, Bob Dylan. And Sony gives us a whole new way to watch television, the first tummy TV. And the Cuban Missile Crisis gives us the return of a 50s curiosity, an idea whose time has come and gone and come again. The fallout shelter. Building or buying one of these is safer, they tell us, than hiding in the hall with our hands over our heads when a nuclear bomb falls. Right. See the water canister? The instructions say to drink the water, then use the canister as a toilet.
On Monday, October 22nd, it dawns on us that our world might soon have no drinkable water. No stout hickory limbs, for that matter. In the most important speech of his life, President Kennedy tells us about the Cuban missiles and scares us.
And I called in the network representatives, and I said, we want a half an hour tonight at 7 o'clock. And I said, what? They said, what for? And I said, for a matter of high national security.
That same night in New York, the local ABC station is about to try something brand new, an hour local newscast. In the days before minicams and satellites, it is a logistical nightmare. And it is Bill Butel's first night as anchorman.
I wish I could tell you that I heard Pierre Salinger say that there was going to be a speech that night at 7 o'clock, and that therefore I said, my heaven, we're in the midst of one of the great history-making events of the 1960s. I wish I could tell you that, but I can't. We were so involved in our own problems that we were not very concerned about the fact that President Kennedy was going to speak, except for one thing. We knew we would have a big audience because President Kennedy was coming on at 7 o'clock, and we were going to end at 6:50, 8:30.
I was a part of a poker club. There was a game planned that night, the 22nd of October, at Art Bookwald's house. And he called me up and he said, hey, should I buy the cold cuts and beers? And I said, no. He said, something really serious is going on.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
A strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
The White House press room is packed. One of the reporters, ABC's John Scally.
I remember the reporters who were watching the speech with me at the White House when the president came to that part, looking at one another and sort of gulping and knowing that this was a crisis of historic and life and death dimensions.
No one can foresee precisely what course it will take, or what costs or casualties will be incurred. But the greatest danger of all would be to do nothing.
Watching television, some of us worried that there was nothing we could do. Here at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, the big news of the week had been that Joey D and the Starlighters would play at homecoming. And then the president spoke. We watched, sitting around the dorm in our Madras wraparound skirts, our Bass-Weegian loafers, and our circle pins. And when the president was done, we rushed to the telephone to call our parents to ask what we ought to do if bombs started falling. For those living closer to Cuba, it was worse.
And my number is Beechwood 15789.
In Miami, disc jockey Rick Shaw is taking requests and playing the hits.
I guess the emotion that comes back to mind is one of intense patriotism, and I remember that very clearly. It was the first time and the only time in the 26 years that I've been playing music in South Florida. After the speech, I got a call and a request for the national anthem.
Lincoln, Nebraska is not 90 miles from Cuba. It should feel safe.
Near the village, the peaceful village, the lion sleeps tonight.
But after the president's speech, a strange occurrence. The Lincoln Civil Defense Director is Richard Vestica.
And people were edgy anyhow, and at 11:15, that siren went off. People called in radio stations. They were calling the law enforcement people. They called in the police department. They called our office. Some guy got me out of bed.
Tuesday, October 23rd.
Quarantine is translated into an official proclamation, fixing the 0 hour, 10 a.m., New York time, Wednesday, October 24th. It is signed John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
If ever I would leave you, it wouldn't be in summer.
At Washington's Shoreham Hotel, a young singer, Robert Goulet, is fresh from performing on Broadway in Camelot. He opens his nightclub act, and reviewing him, Variety describes Goulet as having been as nervous as the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
And so I was therefore very, very anxious and excited and nervous about it. And I remember, oh boy, opening night at the Shoreham, I was going on at 8 o'clock, and the president said there's a blockade. A blockade, what does that mean? That means that someone may get angry and fire a warning shot or a lot of warning shots. Could this be my last night here?
That night, also at the Shoreham, a young comedian, Mark Russell, sings this song.
The CIA picked up their pictures from the drugstore, showing where the Russians had their missile rigs. Only 90 miles away. Are they valid? Who's to say? Or are they color postcards of the Bay of Pigs? Oh, the missiles are aimed at Miami. We're sitting ducks if Khrushchev has his way. Jack knows the danger's great, but he said, I'll hesitate. I didn't carry Florida anyway. But I'm eyeball to eyeball with Nikita. On second thought, I'll launch a big attack. Bombs away without a pause. I'll nuke Fidel because it will help to get Goldwater off my back. Are the Democrats to blame for the missiles? Are they pushovers for Russians? No, I doubt it. If there was a missile strike in the dear old days of Ike, he'd be on the golf course and wouldn't know about it. Boom, boom.
Wednesday, October 24th. The naval blockade is now in place.
The Soviet ship was moving toward that line and clearly would cross it if it continued moving the next day. So I said to George, Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Anderson, George, what are you going to do when that Soviet ship hits that line? He says, damn it, we're going to stop it. What else do you think we're going to do? I said, let me tell you something. You're not going to fire any shot against that tanker with the possibility that it'll blow the damn thing up and that this will be the start of war between the Soviet Union and the U.S. without my permission, and I'm not going to give you my permission without the President's permission. Now, do you understand that? And that's when he said, the Navy's been handling quarantines and blockades since John Paul Jones, and if you let us handle this one, we'll handle it right. And I got up and I walked out of the room.
Kennedy and the Pentagon order vulnerable, low-flying reconnaissance planes to check out the Cuban sites. The mission leader is Navy Captain William Ecker.
We manned our airplanes. There were 6 of us, 3 sections of two each. We each had a wingman, and we hit our burners, took off. I guess the best way to phrase the altitudes that we used in this were treetop level and very fast. And all of a sudden, this stuff started to appear. And again, I couldn't identify things like you see in the pictures now, but it was there, and I could see camouflage netting and so forth over it. We were able to, as I say, pin old Castro's hide to the bulkhead there.
Ecker's pictures confirm the worst. The missile sites are nearly complete, the anti-aircraft guns are in place, and there are soldiers to man those guns. Thursday, October 25th. In the UN Security Council, Ambassador Adlai Stevenson, at his most acerbic, confronts Soviet Ambassador Zorin.
Hell freezes over if that's your decision.
Everybody's doing a brand new dance now. Come on, baby, do the locomotion. I know you.
Fear of war is almost tangible. People who didn't know or didn't care where their neighborhood fallout shelters were suddenly are desperate to find out. Wilhelmina Harvey's husband was the mayor of Key West.
And the grocery stores were running out of groceries, particularly the little independent grocery stores. And we were going in and buying as many of the canned goods as we could buy, candles, kerosene for our old kerosene lamps. And it was a crisis in our lives, just as if a hurricane were brewing.
There were some railroad tracks that I had to go past every night on my way home. I'd never seen a train on those tracks. And I'm going home, and all of a sudden I see the gates coming down. What is this, you know? And I was the first one right up against the gate, and as the train came by, it's got tanks and soldiers.
And most of these big missiles went on the beach, and they were cordoned off with rows and rows of wire, barbed wire. And then the hotel, which had been closed and weeds were growing, why, that became the headquarters for most of the troops.
Friday, October 26th, sailors from the destroyer Joseph Kennedy Jr. board a Soviet ship. No contraband. A few hours later, someone calls ABC State Department correspondent John Scally.
I recognized the voice on the telephone immediately. It was Alexander Fomin, the minister counselor of the Soviet Union, the man that I always referred to privately as Mr. X, because his real function was to be the KGB chief, the head of all the Soviet espionage operations in the United States, and that his embassy title was no more than a cover.
Scally meets Fomin at a Washington restaurant.
His first words were, "It is very serious." And then he said, "I have an idea of a possibility," he said, "that could ease the tensions." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And then he said, "The Soviets might be willing to remove those missiles." I said, "Oh?"
A long, rambling message from Nikita Khrushchev himself seems to propose a deal. The Soviets apparently will pull out the missiles if Kennedy promises not to invade Cuba. Scally, the middleman, tells his KGB contact that the solution would be acceptable.
I'm not terrified yet.
I feel a little weak.
That night, a new play opens on Broadway. It's called The Fun Couple. It stars a young pre-aerobic, pre-political Jane Fonda and Bradford Dillman.
You think we really got married? Yeah, I mean, everything was in Spanish.
I paid the judge in American money.
Dillman is not worried about missiles. He has enough trouble with the show.
The opening line of Walter Kerr's review said, "The only thing that last evening proved to me is that actors do not die of embarrassment on the stage." Actually, we were dropping a bigger bomb on Broadway than Khrushchev could have ever invented. And indeed, if they had sent us out to entertain the Soviet fleet, I'm confident the Russians would have turned tail and run.
Saturday, October 27th. Suddenly, the crisis fever is higher than ever. A U-2 is shot down over Cuba. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, is killed. And a second, more strident note is received from Khrushchev with unacceptable demands. Now he wants the U.S. to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey as a condition for a Soviet pullout from Cuba.
For a while, they didn't know how to deal with that. I mean, which of these messages do you accept? And it was Robert Kennedy who had, I think, was a brilliant idea. He said, let's assume we didn't get the second message. Let's just answer the first message. And that's what we did.
The president wanted to relax. And we went over to the little theater in the White House and watched Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday with Gregory Peck.
Roman Holiday is a schmaltzy, tender story of a princess in love with a newspaper man. A poignant romance that cannot have a happy ending.
And at the end of the picture, I nudged him and I said, "It's all over, Mr. President." He said, "No, it isn't, Dave, not yet." And I was thinking of Audrey Hepburn, and he was thinking of the missiles.
A White House aide gives Pierre Salinger an envelope, instructions for his family if Washington has to be evacuated.
If we have to go to that step, your family should open this envelope, which will tell them where your wife and children should go in case of that emergency. And of course, getting that envelope really gave you the impression that, I mean, we were headed for the abyss. We were headed for a disaster.
October 28th. Faced with Kennedy's resolve and the threat of nuclear war, Khrushchev decides the Cuban missiles aren't worth it and backs down.
We have instructed our officers to take proper measures to stop the construction of installations, dismantle them, and bring them back to the Soviet Union.
Now I cross over to meet the president for the 10 o'clock mass, and as he stepped into the car, into the White House limousine, he said, "Dave, this morning we have an extra reason to pray."
and on that Sunday morning, the president offers prayers of thanksgiving. He's elated. He suspects this might be the high point of his presidency, and referring to Abraham Lincoln, he says to Bobby, "This is the night I should go to the theater." Meanwhile, the rest of the country, not knowing the fever has broken, not knowing the crisis has passed, still is praying for deliverance. It will be much later in the day, after Khrushchev's response can be checked and rechecked, before the American people learn that deliverance already has arrived.
In that transition between threat and deliverance, the fear does not suddenly vanish. It ebbs like a brackish tide. That same Sunday, when the crisis breaks, a New York newspaper has a special supplement on how to conduct yourself in the event of nuclear attack. Pedestrians are told that any cover, even a newspaper, over face and exposed skin will minimize burns during the 3/1000ths of a second peak heat radiation that travels with the speed of light. In your office, it says, with the flash of the explosion, dive flat behind a desk or between filing cabinets. If there's time, get to the center of your building. And no child will be allowed to leave school during or immediately after a nuclear attack, nor will parents be encouraged to try to take them out. Parental tolerance has never been put to that awful test. Come back to October 1962 and some things we seem to have learned from those longest days.
Hey, Chris, can't go surfing dressed like that.
Can't today, going home.
Home? I thought you were staying all week.
Mom wanted ice cream last night. Dad couldn't find our money.
What, did you lose it?
Somebody stole it.
I'm sorry. We'll see you next summer, though, huh?
Yeah.
It could happen to you right here in the U.S., so don't carry cash. Carry American Express traveler's checks. Don't leave home without them.
Aquafresh case history 43. Jim Edwards, Aquafresh user. Never had a cavity in his life. But at 17, facing new problems, gum disease and bad breath. Recommendation, now more than ever needs a complete toothpaste. Triple protection Aquafresh. It fights cavities with fluoride, freshens breath, and helps remove plaque to reduce early gum disease called gingivitis in one complete toothpaste.
Jim, this is really important.
Aquafresh. More than cavity protection, triple protection.
I'm an apple lover. Sunny apple lover. Real needy sunny apple. Real needy sunny apple lover.
You love the Big Apple taste of Riunite Sunny Apple. The taste of fresh apples and natural Riunite, not a watered-down cooler.
Sunny apple lover. Sunny apple, sunny apple. Riunite sunny apple lover.
Try peach and raspberry, too.
Riunite.
He's back!
By the way, Max has been after you.
Control!
No, get him off. Interested in me. I can't make him stop unless he wants to.
Max Headroom. Tomorrow.
Albert Einstein once was asked what would happen in the event of nuclear war. Well, he said, we would no longer be able to listen to the music of Mozart. The Cuban Missile Crisis did not become World War III. Mozart was not canceled. That was a fine moment. But like any moment, what is good for some is not so good for others. Concerning the events in those 2 weeks in October 1962, there is good news and bad news. First, the good news.
Return to sender. Return to sender.
It took a few tense weeks to iron out the details, but the missiles were dismantled, crated, and sent back to the Soviet Union. They have never returned. The superpowers had looked nuclear war in the face and had not liked what they saw. In August of the following year, the first hotline between the Kremlin and the White House was installed. Now our leaders could talk before they struck. And the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain signed the world's first treaty banning nuclear tests above ground. In 1964, Kremlin hardliners threw Khrushchev out.
Now the bad news. The race to build more weapons did intensify, and even the Soviets admit it had something to do with the humiliation they felt at being forced to back down in Cuba in October 1962. In 1986, it's the nearness of countries like Nicaragua that has us training Contras. If the Soviets could arm Cuba, why not Nicaragua?
Using Nicaragua as a base, the Soviets and Cubans can become the dominant power in the crucial corridor between North and South America.
As for the other players in October 1962, well, Richard Nixon was not elected governor of California and decided to quit politics.
You don't have Nixon to kick around anymore. Because, gentlemen, this is my last press conference.
We were wrong about his career. He was wrong about us kicking him around some more.
I just figured out what my life work's going to be. Oh, well, could you close the door before you tell me? Well, sure, Mom.
And all those overwhelmingly contented sitcom families, well, we still got them.
Nothing's changed. I'm still the beaver.
Well, there it is, the way it was for a couple of nasty weeks in October of 1962. President Kennedy had just finished reading The Guns of August, Barbara Tuchman's new account of how the great European powers had bungled their way into World War I. Kennedy had blundered into the Bay of Pigs in 1961, and he was determined not to blunder again in the same place. He succeeded by being brave enough to choose the more timid course, an active response short of war. The quarantine put the onus back on Khrushchev. Now it was the Soviets who had to back down or bear the responsibility for nuclear war. Khrushchev chose humiliation for himself, peace for the world, and it doomed him. 2 years later, he would be out of power, Kennedy would be dead. The abyss is still there, ready to snare their successors, but nobody has come that close to the edge again.
How much of a threat were those Soviet missiles in Cuba? A big one, we believed. But then Cuba also felt threatened, and with reason. In 1961, we had invaded that country. Cuba was then, and is now, the only nation in our world with both Soviet and American military installations within its borders. Did we learn anything from the near miss of October 1962? We learned the atomic age was here to stay. But were we? Are we? Khrushchev told a story about the Russian peasant, so poor he had to share a house with a goat. The man got used to the smell, but he never liked the arrangement. Cuba, said Khrushchev, was America's goat. From where we stood, the goat looked Russian. Now, in 1986, the whole damn place is full of animals, and the complaints are louder. But now we know something else, too. We know that waking up in a room full of goats beats the alternative. Sure, the goats still stink, but the house still stands. And so it goes.
Got the same old bowl
and the same old spoon.
But here's a tasty fiber breakthrough that's brand new. It's the traffic. It's for brand new. It's a breakthrough. I said for brand new.
Kellogg's Nutrific blends the goodness of wheat, corn, barley, and oat brands.
It's nutritious.
In dark, hearty flakes.
It's terrific.
With almond-covered raisins and almond slivers.
It's the traffic. The traffic. It's for brand new.
Humor helps you deal with life's unexpected possibilities, and so does MasterCard. If you lose it, which I did, they replace it. Thank you. And thank you, MasterCard. MasterCard, master the possibilities.
Hi there. You looking for Mr. Right?
Give this guy a light.
Wow.
And Bud Light here.
Ask for Bud Light, the light beer with the first name and taste. Because everything else is just a light.
Thanks. Keep the chains.
Tonight, understanding the mind of a fanatical Shiite Muslim. Find out why they commit acts we find so horrifying and why they hate us so much. Watch 2020 next.
Also in October 1962.
The Soviet Union wins the Chess Olympics. The United States, with Bobby Fischer playing first board, finishes fourth.
The U.S. Surgeon General forms a panel to find out if cigarette smoking is harmful.
Edith Piaf, 47, marries her protege, a former hairdresser. He is 23.
The Air Force Surgeon General announces there will be no more free cigarettes in Air Force hospitals.
Huntington Hartford II, heir to the A&P millions, marries Diane Brown, a model. His third marriage, her first.
Chicken noodle is Campbell's most popular soup. It sells for 18 cents a can.
Lana Turner files for a Mexican divorce from her fifth husband, Fred May.
The New York City Ballet performs before a packed house in Moscow.
Officials at Wimbledon decree that women tennis players must wear white, all white, including panties.
The Leningrad Orchestra performs to a packed house in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
In Hollywood, Lenny Bruce is arrested for speaking obscene words in a public place.
For a transcript of this broadcast, send $3 to Our World Transcripts, 2 John Street, New York, New York, 10038.
You can make a difference. Help someone learn how to read.
Meet the men of One Life to Live. Cord Roberts, his heart only belongs to one.
You are stuck with me for life.
Max Holden, a cocky kid with a lot of charm. And Steve Holden, trying to break out of his brother's shadow.
We are not kids anymore, Max.
One Life to Live, weekdays,